Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure Mystery Book Club. I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library, and today we are doing a special pre-recorded version of our usual Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because I'm not actually working on Friday at the moment. So we have, however, our usual great book, King Solomon's Mines, by H. Rider Haggard, which you can see if you pull up to a mirror, I guess, because our picture is reversed. Um, just to give you a quick recap on what has happened so far, in the first four chapters, we have been introduced to Alan Quatermain, elephant hunter and explorer. He is later in life, he's 55 years old at the time this story happens. And while on his way back home to South Africa, he meets up with two gentlemen, a former naval officer named Captain Good and a very wealthy lord, Sir Henry Curtis. And they have come to him with a proposition. Basically, Sir Henry Curtis's brother has gone missing while searching in a certain part of Africa called Kukwana and he found that there was supposed to be this mine of diamonds, a diamond mine that is overflowing with diamonds, called King Solomon's Mines. And um, no one has heard anything from him since then. Now, we were given a couple of flashback stories from other people who have traveled to the mountains through the desert in the heart of Africa to find King Solomon's mines, and no one has come out and survived. One person came back for a little bit. He was severely dehydrated, severely malnourished, very thin, all near death already. And then they took him in and took care of him, but he died a few hours later. So no one has really made it to this secret and mystical place. And so they want to hire Alan Quatermain to be their guide and to point them in the right direction and to make use of his elephant hunting and exploring skills. So they have gotten to South Africa. They have purchased a wagon and servants and oxen and supplies, and the three of them have taken with them a man, one of the native men, who is a huge, broad, uh, very impressive person. He comes in with this very, uh, what's the word? Very, he is a lot of dignity. Okay. That's the word I'm trying to find. Is that he's this very dignified, very large character, very large man, and he says he would like to join them. And not only will he join them, because he has his own reasons for going to searching for King Solomon's mines, but he doesn't want any pay. The only thing he wants is a place to sleep and the same food that everyone else gets, and that's it. And so and his name is Umbopo, and he will be following them along, and so we follow the characters as they travel northward to the heart of Africa, and they're already coming across some small adventures. The oxen are getting bitten by snakes, and some are dying, and they have to rescue some others. And then in chapter 4, there was actually a very long and somewhat lurid and gruesome description of how they came across some elephants and they started to do what they do, which is elephant hunting. And I should probably mention at this point that it is, considering this is a turn of the century story of explorers in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it is kind of odd nowadays to have a main character, the hero, the protagonist, if you will, who is an elephant, an ivory hunter, basically. He doesn't just kill elephants for the ivory. It just describes how they take the meat from it as well. So they're utilizing the elephant, which I guess sort of takes a little bit of the curse off of it. But really, it's still very odd nowadays to look at this character and see him as a heroic character that the readers would want to empathize with, because he does, kill animals, and they talk about lions and antelope and other creatures that they have hunted, and again they'll take they'll take the meat, and they'll take the horns and the tusks, and they will then sell them, and that is part of the profit from this journey. That was one of the things that Alan Quatermain asked for during the trip. So Sir Henry Curtis is wealthy, and he is supplying the money for this, and he is paying Alan Quatermain and Captain Good to go along with him, and then Alan Quatermain, of course, knows the layout of the land and knows what to buy and knows who to get, and they travel northward in this way, all in the hopes that he will make his fortune. Now, he's already said, which is kind of interesting to me, that he's a bit of a fatalist, and that he doesn't really expect to survive this trip because no one else has, and because he just thinks it's not going to happen. He doesn't expect it to live. But he's already secured financing from Sir Henry Curtis to give a large sum of money for 5 years, annually, once a year for 5 years, while his son is in medical school, which is where he is right now. And so as long as his son is being taken care of and looked after financially, then he's okay with, possibly dying on this trip. So we are treated to this, I think by modern standards, a somewhat a bloodthirsty description of elephant hunting, even to the point where one of the men who has gone with them is attacked by a rogue elephant, an elephant that has been shot already but not killed, and this elephant returns to attack them, and literally, in again, very graphic description, he's literally torn apart by this elephant, and it's like, oh my goodness, oh, we're going that way, that's the direction we're going, okay, oh. Well, bearing that in mind, why don't we start chapter 5, which is entitled Our March into the Desert. We had killed 9 elephants, and it took us 2 days to cut out the tusks, and having brought them into camp, to bury them carefully in the sand under a large tree, which made a conspicuous mark for miles around. It was a wonderfully fine lot of ivory. I never saw a better, averaging as it did between 40 and 50 pounds a tusk. The tusks of the great bull that killed poor Kiva scaled 170 pounds the pair, as nearly as we could judge. As for Kiva himself, we buried what remained of him in an ant-bear hole, together with an assaji to protect him on his journey to a better world. On the 3rd day we marched again, hoping that we might live to return to dig up our buried ivory. And in due course, after a long, wearisome tramp and many adventures which I have not space to detail, we reached Sitanda's Kraal, near the Lukanga River, the real starting point of our expedition. Very well do I recollect our arrival at that place. To the right was a scattered native settlement with a few stone cattle kraals and some cultivated land down by the water, where these savages grew their scanty supply of grain, and beyond it stretched great tracts of waving veldt, covered with tall grass, over which herds of smaller game were wandering. To the left lay the vast desert. This spot appears to be the outpost of the fertile country, and it would be difficult to say to what natural causes such an abrupt change in the character of the soil is due. But so it is. Just below our encampment flowed a little stream, on the farther side of which is a stony slope, the same down which 20 years before I had seen poor Silvestri creeping back after his attempt to reach Solomon's Mines. Beyond that slope begins the waterless desert, covered with a species of carew shrub. It was evening when we pitched our camp, and the red ball of the sun was sinking into the desert, sending glorious rays of many-colored light flying over all its vast expanse. Leaving Good to superintend the arrangement of our little camp, I took Sir Henry with me, and walking to the top of the slope opposite, we gazed across the sandy waste. The air was very clear, and far, far away I could distinguish the faint blue outlines of the Suleiman Berg, here and there capped with white. "There," I said, "there is the wall around Solomon's Mines, but God knows if we shall ever climb it." "My brother should be there, if he is, I shall reach him somehow," said Sir Henry, in that tone of quiet confidence which marked the man. "I hope so," I answered, and turned to go back to camp, when I saw that we were not alone. Behind us, also gazing earnestly towards the far-off mountains, stood the great Kafir Umbopo. The Zulu spoke when he saw that I had observed him addressing Sir Henry, to whom he had attached himself. "Is it to that land that thou wouldst journey, Incubu?" A native word meaning an elephant, and the Zulu name given to Sir Henry by the Kafirs, he said, pointing toward the mountains with his broad assegai. I asked him sharply what he meant by addressing his master in that familiar way. It is very well for natives to have a name for one among themselves, but it is not decent that they should call a white man by their heathenish appellations to his face. The Zulu laughed a quiet little laugh, which angered me. "How dost thou know that I am not the equal of the Inkosi whom I serve?" he said. "He is of a royal house, no doubt. One can see it in his size and by his mien. So, mayhap, am I. At least I am as great a man. Be my mouth, O Makumazan, and say my words to the Inkus Inkubu, my master, for I would speak to him and to thee." I was wroth with the man, for I am not accustomed to being talked to in that way by Kafirs, but somehow he impressed me. Besides, I was curious to know what he had to say, so I translated, expressing my opinion at the same time that he was an impudent fellow and that his swagger was outrageous. "Yes, Umbopa," answered Sir Henry, "I would journey there." "The desert is wide, and there is no water in it. The mountains are high and covered with snow, and man cannot say what lies beyond them, behind the place where the sun sets. How shalt thou come thither, Inkubu, and wherefore dost thou go?" I translated again. "Tell him," answered Sir Henry, "that I go because I believe that a man of my blood, my brother, has gone there before me, and I journey to seek him." "That is so, Inkubu. A Hottentot I met on the road told me that a white man went out into the desert 2 years ago toward those mountains with one servant, a hunter. They never came back." "How do you know it was my brother?" asked Sir Henry. "Nay, I know not, but the Hottentot, when I asked what the white man was like, said that he had thine eyes, and a black beard. He said, too, that the name of the hunter with him was Jim, that he was a Bechuana hunter and wore clothes." "There was no doubt about it," said I. "I knew Jim well." Sir Henry nodded. "I was sure of it," he said. "If George set his mind upon a thing, he generally did it. It was always so from his boyhood. If he meant to cross the Suleiman Berg, he crossed it, unless some accident overtook him and we must look for him on the other side." Umbopa understood English, though he rarely spoke it. "It is a far journey, Inkubu," he put in, and I translated his remark. "Yes," answered Sir Henry, "it is far, but there is no journey upon this earth that a man may not make if he sets his heart to it. There is nothing, Umbopa, that he cannot do. There are no mountains he may climb, there are no deserts he cannot cross, save a mountain and a desert of which you are spared the knowledge. If love leads him, and he holds his life in his hand, counting it as nothing, ready to keep it or lose it, as heaven above may order. I translated. Great words, my father, answered the Zulu. I always called him a Zulu, though he was not really one. Great swelling words fit to fill the mouth of a man. Thou art right, my father Nkubu. Listen. What is life? It is a feather. It is the seed of the grass, blown hither and thither, sometimes multiplying itself and dying in the act, sometimes carried hence into heavens. But if that seed be good and heavy, it may perchance travel a little way on the road it wills. It is well to try and journey one's road, and to fight with the air. Man must die. All the worst he can, but die a little sooner. I will go with thee across the desert and over the mountains, unless, perchance, I fall to the ground on the way, my father. He paused a while, and then went on with one of those strange bursts of rhetorical eloquence that Zulus sometimes indulge in, which, to my mind, full though they are of vain repetitions, show that the race is by no means devoid of poetic instinct and of intellectual power. What is life? Tell me, O white men, who are wise, who know the secrets of the world and of the world of stars, and the world that lies above around the stars, who flash your words from afar without a voice. Tell me, white men, the secret of your life, whither it goes, and whence it comes. You cannot answer me, you know not. I will answer. Out of the dark we came, into the dark we go. Like a storm-driven bird at night we fly out of nowhere. For a moment our wings are seen in the light of the fire, and lo, we are gone again into the nowhere. Life is nothing. Life is all. It is the hand with which we hold off death. It is the glowworm that shines in the night-time and is black in the morning. It is the white breath of the oxen in the winter. It is the little shadow that runs across the grass and loses itself at sunset. You are a strange man, said Sir Henry when he had ceased. Umbopa laughed. It seems to me that we are much alike, Nkubu. Perhaps I seek a brother over the mountains. I looked at him suspiciously. What dost thou mean? I asked. What dost thou know of these mountains? A little, a very little. There is a strange land yonder, a land of witchcraft and beautiful things, a land of brave people and of trees and streams and snowy peaks and of a great white road. I have heard of it. But what is the good of talking? It grows dark. Those who live to see will see. Again I looked at him doubtfully. The man knew too much. You need not fear me, Macumazahn, he said, interpreting my look. I dig no holes for you to fall in. I make no plots. If ever we cross those mountains behind the sun, I will tell you what I know. But death sits upon them. Be wise and turn back. Go and hunt elephants, my masters. I have spoken. And without another word he lifted his spear in salutation and returned towards the camp, where, shortly afterwards, we found him cleaning a gun like any other Kafir. That is an odd man, said Sir Henry. Yes, answered I. Too odd by half. I don't like his little ways. He knows something and will not speak out. But I suppose it is no use quarreling with him. We are in for a curious trip, and a mysterious Zulu won't make much difference one way or another. Next day we made our arrangements for starting. Of course, it was impossible to drag our heavy elephant rifles and other kit with us across the desert, so Dismissing our bearers, we made an arrangement with the old native who had a kraal close by to take care of them till we returned. It went to my heart to leave such things as those sweet tools to the tender mercies of an odd thief, of a savage whose greedy eyes I could see gloating over them. But I took some precautions. First of all, I loaded all the rifles, placed them at full cock, and informed him that if he touched them they would go off. He tried the experiment instantly with my 8-bore, and it did go off, and blew a hole right through one of his oxen, which were just then being driven up to the kraal, to say nothing of knocking him head over heels with the recoil. He got up, considerably startled, and not at all pleased at the loss of the ox, for which he had the impudence to ask me to pay. After that, nothing would induce him to touch the guns again. "Put the live devils out of the way up there in the thatch," he said, "or they will murder us all." Then I told him that, when we came back, if any of those things were missing, I would kill him and his people by witchcraft, and if we died and he tried to steal the rifles, I would come to haunt him and turn his cattle mad and his milk sour till life was a weariness, and would make the devils in the guns jump out and talk to him in a way he did not like, and generally gave him a good idea of judgment to come. After that, he promised to look after them as though they were his father's spirit. He was a very superstitious old Kafir, and a great villain. Having thus disposed of our superfluous gear, we arranged the kit, we 5, Sir Henry, Good, myself, Umbopa, and the Hottentot Ventvogel, were to take with us on our journey. It was small enough, but do what we would, we could not get its weight down under about 40 pounds a man. This is what it consisted of: 3 express rifles and 200 rounds of ammunition, the 2 Winchester repeating rifles for Umbopa and Ventvogel with 200 rounds of cartridge, 3 Colt revolvers and 60 rounds of cartridge, 5 Cochrane's water bottles, each holding 4 pints, 5 blankets, 25 pounds weight of biltong, i.e. sun-dried game flesh, 10 pounds weight of best mixed beads for gifts, a selection of medicine including an ounce of quinine and 1 or 2 small surgical instruments, our knives, a few sundries such as a compass, matches, a pocket filter, tobacco, a trowel, a bottle of brandy, and the clothes we stood in. This was our total equipment, a small one indeed for such a venture, but we dare not attempt to carry more. Indeed, that load was a heavy one per man, and with which to travel across the burning desert, for in such places every additional ounce tells. But we could not see our way to reducing the amount. There was nothing taken but what was absolutely necessary. With great difficulty and the promise of a present of a good hunting knife each, I succeeded in persuading 3 wretched natives from the village to come with us for the first stage, 20 miles, and to carry large gourds holding a gallon of water apiece. My object was to enable us to refill our water bottles after the first night's march, for we determined to start in the cool of the evening. I gave out to these natives that we were going to shoot ostriches, with which the desert abounded. They jabbered and shrugged their shoulders, saying that we were mad and would perish of thirst, which I must say seemed probable. Still, being desirous of obtaining the knives, which were almost unknown treasures up there, they consented to come, having probably reflected that, after all, our subsequent extinction would be no affair of theirs. All the next day we rested and slept, and at sunset ate a hearty meal of fresh beef washed down with tea. At the last, as Good remarked sadly, we were likely to drink for many a long day. Then, having made our final preparations, we lay down and waited for the moon to rise. At last, about 9 o'clock, up she came in all her glory, flooding the wild country with light and showing a silver sheen on the expanse of rolling desert before us, which looked as solemn and silent as an alien to man as the star-studded firmament above. We rose up, and in a few minutes were ready, and yet we hesitated a little, as human nature is prone to hesitate on the threshold of an irrevocable step. We 3 white men stood by ourselves, Umbopa, Assaji, in hand and rifle slung across his shoulders, looked out fixedly across the desert a few paces ahead of us, while the hired natives, with the gourds of water and Ventvogel, were gathered in a little knot behind. "Gentlemen," said Sir Henry presently in his deep voice, "we are going on about as strange a journey as men can make in this world. It is very doubtful if we can succeed in it, but we are 3 men who will stand together for good or for evil to the last. Now, before we start, let us for a moment pray to the power who shapes the destinies of men, and who ages since has marked out our paths, that it may please him to direct our steps in accordance with his will." Taking off his hat for the space of a minute or two, he covered his face with his hands, and Good and I did likewise. I did not say that I am a first-rate praying man. Few hunters are, and as for Sir Henry, I never heard him speak like that before, and only once since, though deep down in his heart I believe that he is very religious. Good, too, is pious, though apt to swear. Although I do not remember excepting on 2 occasions, ever putting up a better prayer in my life than I did during that minute, and somehow I felt the happier for it. Our future was so completely unknown, and I think that the unknown, and that the awful always brings a man nearer to his Maker. "And now," said Sir Henry, "trek." And so we started. We had nothing to guide ourselves by except the distant mountains, and old José de Silvestra's chart, which, considering that it was drawn by a dying and half-distraught man on a fragment of linen 3 centuries ago, was not a very satisfactory sort of thing to work with. Still, our sole hope of success depended upon it, such as it was. If we failed in finding that pool of bad water, which the old dame marked as being situated in the middle of the desert, about 60 miles from our starting point, and as far from the mountains, in all probability we must perish miserably of thirst. But to my mind, the chances of our finding it in that great area of sand and Carew scrub seemed almost infinitesimal. Even surpassing the de Silvestra had marked the pool correctly. What was there to prevent its having been dried up by the sun generations ago, or trampled in by game, or filled with the drifting sand? On we tramped silently as shades through the night, and in the heavy sand. The Carew bushes caught our feet and retarded us, and the sand worked into our veltshirns and Good's shooting boots, so that every few miles we had to stop and empty them. Still, the night kept fairly cool, though the atmosphere was thick and heavy, giving a sort of creamy feel to the air, and we made fair progress. It was very silent and lonely there in the desert, oppressively so indeed. Good felt this, and once began to whistle the girl I left behind me. But the notes sounded lugubrious in that vast place, and he gave it up. Shortly afterwards, a little incident occurred which, though it startled us at the time, gave rise to a laugh. Good was leading as the holder of the compass, which, being a sailor, of course, he understood thoroughly, and we were toiling along in single file behind him, when suddenly we heard a half-smothered exclamation, and he vanished. The next second there arose all around us a most extraordinary hubbub. Snorts, groans, and wild sounds of rushing feet. In the faint light, too, we could descry dim, galloping forms, half hidden by wreaths of sand. The natives threw down their loads and prepared to bolt. Then, remembering that there was nowhere to run to, they cast themselves upon the ground and howled something about ghosts. As for Sir Henry and myself, we stood amazed. Nor was our amazement lessened when we perceived the form of Good careening off in the direction of the mountains, apparently mounted on the back of a horse, and hallooing wildly. In another second he threw up his arms, and we heard him come to the earth with a thud. Then I saw what had happened. We had stumbled upon a herd of sleeping quagga, onto the back of one of which Good had actually had fallen, whereupon the brute naturally got up and made off with him. Calling out to the others that it was all right, I ran towards Good, much afraid lest he should be hurt, but, to my great relief, I found him sitting in the sand, his eyeglass still fixed firmly in his eye, rather shaken and very much frightened, but not in any way injured. After this, we traveled on without any further misadventure till about 1 o'clock, when we called a halt, and having drunk a little water, not much, for water was precious, and rested for half an hour, we started again. On we went, till at last the east began to blush like the cheek of a girl. Next appeared faint rays of primrose light that changed presently to golden bars, through which the dawn glided out across the desert. The stars grew pale and paler still, till at last they vanished. The golden moon waxed wane, and her mountain ridges stood out against her sickly face like the bones on the cheek of a dying man. Then came spear upon spear of light flashing far away across the boundless wilderness, piercing and firing the veils of mist till the desert was draped in a tremulous golden glow, and it was day. So we did not halt, though by this time we should have been glad enough to do so, for we knew that when once the sun was fully up, it would be almost impossible for us to travel. At length, about an hour later, we spied a little pile of boulders rising up out of the plain, and to this we dragged ourselves. As luck would have it, here we found an overhanging slab of rock, carpeted beneath with smooth sand, which afforded a most grateful shelter from the heat. Underneath we crept, and each of us having drunk some water and eaten a bit of biltong, we lay down and soon were sound asleep. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we woke to find our bearers preparing to return. They had seen enough of the desert already, and no number of knives would have tempted them to come a step farther. So we took a hearty drink, and, having emptied our water bottles, filled them up again from the gourds that they had brought with them. Then we watched them depart on their 20 miles tramp home. At 4:30, we started again. It was lonely and desolate work, for, with the exception of a few ostriches, there was not a single living creature to be seen on all the vast expanse of sandy plains. Evidently it was too dry for game, and with the exception of a deadly-looking cobra or two, we saw no reptiles. One insect, however, we found abundant, and that was the common or housefly. On they came, not as single spies, but in battalions, as I think the Old Testament says somewhere. There's a footnote at this point that says readers must be aware of accepting Mr. Quatermain's references as accurate, as it has been found some are prone to do. Although his reading evidently was limited, the impression produced by it upon his mind was mixed. Thus, to him, the Old Testament and Shakespeare were interchangeable authorities. The housefly is a most extraordinary insect. Go where you will, you find him. And so it must have been always. I have seen him enclosed in amber, which is, I was told, quite 500,000 years old, looking exactly like his descendants of today. And I have little doubt that when the last man lies dying on the earth, he will be buzzing round, if this event should happen to occur in summer, watching for an opportunity to settle on his nose. At sunset we halted, waiting for the moon to rise. At last she came up, beautiful and serene as ever, and, with one halt about 2 o'clock in the morning, we trudged on wearily through the night, till at last the welcome sun put a period to our labors. We drank a little, and flung ourselves down on the sand, thoroughly tired out, and soon we were all asleep. There was no need to set a watch, for we had nothing to fear from anybody or anything in that vast, untenanted plain. Our only enemies were heat, thirst, and flies, but far rather would I have faced any danger from man or beast than that awful trinity. This time we were not so lucky as to find a sheltering rock to guard us from the glare of the sun, with the result that about 7 o'clock we woke up experiencing the exact sensations one would attribute to a beefsteak on a gridiron. We were literally being baked through and through. The burning sun seemed to be sucking our very blood out of us. We sat up and gasped. "Phew!" said I, grabbing at the halo of flies which buzzed cheerfully round my head. The heat did not affect them. "My word!" exclaimed Sir Henry. "It's devilish hot," echoed Good. It was hot, indeed, and there was not a bit of shelter to be found. Look where we would, there were no rocks or trees, nothing but an unending glare, rendered dazzling by the heated air that danced over the surface of the desert as it dances over a cooking stove. "What is to be done?" asked Sir Henry. "We can't stand this for long." We looked at each other blankly. "I have it," said Good. "We must dig a hole, get in, and cover ourselves with the carrow bushes." It did not seem a very promising suggestion, but at least it was better than nothing, so we set to work, and, with the trowel we had brought with us, and the help of our hands, in about an hour we succeeded in delving out a patch of ground some 10 feet long by 12 wide to the depth of 2 feet. Then we cut a quantity of low shrub with our hunting knives, and, creeping into the hole, pulled it over all of us, with the exception of Ventvogel, on whom, being a Hottentot, the heat had no particular effect. This gave us some slight shelter from the burning rays of the sun, but the atmosphere in that amateur grave can be better imagined than described. The Black Hole of Calcutta must have been a fool to it. Indeed, to this moment, I do not know how we lived through that day. There we lay, panting, and every now and again moistening our lips from our scanty supply of water. Had we followed our inclinations, we should have finished all we possessed in the first 2 hours, but we were forced to exercise the most rigid care, for if our water failed us, we knew that very soon we must perish miserably. But everything has an end, if only you live long enough to see it. And somehow that miserable day wore on towards evening. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we determined that we could bear it no longer. It would be better to die walking than to be killed slowly by heat and thirst in this dreadful pit. So, taking each of us a little drink from our fast diminishing supply of water, now warmed to about the same temperature as a man's blood, we staggered forward. We had now covered some 50 miles of wilderness. If the reader will refer to the rough copy and translation of old de Silvestra's map, he will see that the desert is marked as measuring 40 leagues across, and the Pan-Bad water is set down as being about in the middle of it. Now, 40 leagues is 120 miles. Consequently, we ought at the most to be within 12 or 15 miles of the water, if any should really exist. Through the afternoon, we crept slowly and painfully along, scarcely doing more than 1.5 miles an hour. At sunset, we rested again, waiting for the moon, and after drinking a little, managed to get some sleep. Before we lay down, Umbopa pointed out to us a slight and indistinct hillock on the only flat surface of the plain about 8 miles away. At the distance, it looked like an anthill, and as I was dropping off to sleep, I fell to wondering what it could be. With the moon, we marched again, feeling dreadfully exhausted and suffering tortures from thirst and prickly heat. Nobody who has not felt it can know what we went through. We walked no longer. We staggered, now and again falling from exhaustion and being obliged to call a halt every hour or so. We had scarcely energy left in us to speak. Up to this, Good had chatted and joked, for he was a merry fellow, but now he had not a jest in him. At last, about 2 o'clock, utterly worn out in body and mind, we came to the foot of the queer hill, or sand kopje, which at first sight resembled a gigantic ant heap, about 100 feet high, covering at its base nearly 2 acres of ground. Here we halted, and, driven to it by our desperate thirst, sucked down our last drops of water. But we had but half a pint ahead, and each of us could have drunk a gallon. Then we lay down. Just as I was dropping off to sleep, I heard Umbopa remark to himself in Zulu, "If we cannot find water, we shall all be dead before the moon rises tomorrow." I shuddered. Hot as it was, the near prospect of such an awful death is not pleasant, but even the thought of it could not keep me from sleeping. All right. This chapter went a little long, so I'm going to end it there. We're just going to stick with chapter 5 at this point, and we'll read chapter 6 and maybe chapter 7 on Monday. So I hope you can join me on Monday at 4 p.m. and we'll continue with King Solomon's Mines. You can see that it's getting dramatic. Our heroes have to be resourceful and strong, and have to be able to see if they can make it through the desert. Thank you for joining me today. We'll see you again on Monday. Take care, everyone.